Welcome everyone to this week's video. Today we are on Fish Friday number 236 and we have a good one for you today. Today's fish is one of the more well-known fish that you would experience in my channel, and I'm willing to bet that if you enjoy eating fish, you've probably eaten this fish before. It's also a fish species that I realize we've done a huge disservice to this channel by not talking about yet. Today's fish that we're going to be talking about is the sockeye salmon. Now the sockeye salmon, or scientific name Oncorhynchus nerca, again that's Oncorhynchus nerca, it is part of the family Salmonidae, which is the family of salmon or trout. Go figure. Now I said that we've done a huge disservice to this channel because I realized that I don't believe I have talked about any of the Pacific salmon species on this channel yet, and they are actually incredibly important to the fish world. I think we might have talked about Atlantic salmon, I'm not sure, and we've definitely mentioned Pacific salmon, but I don't know if we've actually talked about any salmon. We've talked about trout, but we need to talk about the Pacific salmon. Now the sockeye salmon, or other common names would be the red salmon or the blueback salmon, and those are going to be native to the northern Pacific Ocean, Pacific salmon. Now they will be found as far south as mid-California, but they're more known for their northern latitudes, so Alaska, Canada, and things like that. They are, very well known up in the northern latitudes. They're thought of as a cold water fish. Now they live most of their life in the ocean, and that kind of poses the problem and probably why I haven't actually talked about these fish in the past. Remember, we did a freshwater fish last week, and I like to rotate freshwater to saltwater, freshwater to saltwater. Well, this fish, and realistically all of the Pacific salmon, they live most of their life in the ocean, so you'd almost consider them a saltwater fish. However, they live in saltwater and then will migrate into freshwater, doing what they call the salmon runs. This is probably well known to most of you. Just an interesting little fact, when fish live in the saltwater and migrate into freshwater to spawn, that is what is known as an anadromous fish. A catadromous fish, it would be the exact opposite, where it lives most of its life in freshwater and migrates out into saltwater to spawn. And we've talked about catadromous fish in the past, mainly the American eel. So an anadromous fish, yes, they're spending most of their time out in the ocean, and then they'll migrate inland in these waters to spawn. You're probably fairly aware of this. They'll live a year, maybe two. Actually, it'd be more like 2 years, sometimes only 1 year, as basically baby fish up in these freshwater streams, and then will migrate out to the ocean and spend most of their life there. Now, something interesting is the farthest inland sockeye travel is to Redfish Lake, Idaho, where they travel from the ocean over 1,400 kilometers, which is 900 miles, by river from the ocean, and there's a change in 2,000 meters, 6,500 feet in elevation, which when you think it, that is a very, very impressive salmon run, going 900 miles inland and going up a total of 6,500 feet. It is a truly bizarre and interesting salmon run. I should mention there are landlocked populations, meaning there are reproducing populations that spend 100% of their time in freshwater. They're never as big as the saltwater fish, but it's still interesting to note that they do have that sort of capacity of evolving into like a pure freshwater species. Now, this is what I would call a medium fish. It's found between 60 and 84 centimeters, which is 2 to 2 feet 9 inches, and they weigh 2.3 to 7 kilograms, which is 5 to 15 pounds. Now, if you remember, one of the common names I talked about was this fish was actually the blueback salmon, and that's because when they are out in the ocean, they will more often than not look like this, a very silvery body with a darker to bluish tinged back. And this is what they look like outside of breeding season in the ocean. When it becomes breeding season, they will develop these very red bodies and their heads will turn very green. Something interesting to note, if you want to know if you're looking at a sockeye salmon versus other Pacific salmon, the sockeye salmon does not have the any real spots on the backs. They might be speckled, but no large significant spots. They actually do have these long serrated gill rakers, which you cannot find a good picture of, but you can see here this beautiful red coloration with this really bright green head. I do want to mention that it is only the males that develop this really distinctive hump in their back, and they have these very hooked jaws with very tiny, and they're almost invisible in the water, teeth. They look very menacing, but they're really, I wouldn't call them actually that menacing. It's more for breeding combat. So when the males are competing with each other, that is why the males develop the hook jaws and the females do not. It's actually very inefficient for them because it's really difficult for them to eat with this jaw setup. And something interesting to note, you might have heard this before. So here's a picture of the salmon runs, by the way. I meant to show this, and they can number in millions of fish moving upstream at once. It's truly a impressive thing to think about. But what's interesting to note, and many people are aware of this, is that these salmon species die after they reproduce. Not immediately. Sometimes they'll reproduce 3-4 times throughout the season, but they essentially die after one breeding season. That is not that uncommon of knowledge. But for the interesting fact we're going to end the video on is something that a lot of people don't think of. And it actually kind of helps draw the line between biology and ecology. Where my background was a lot more in the ecological side of fish. Biological is just the study of biology and specimens, meaning, what makes the fish a fish, and, things like that, the study of the animal itself. Ecology is the study of biological organisms and their interactions with their environment. And that is why I wanted to talk about the interesting fact I wanted to end the video on is something that I would like you all to dive deeper and think about. What a lot of people don't realize is that these old growth forests found throughout the Pacific Northwest are usually fairly nutrient poor systems. Everyone talks about the crystal clear mountain streams throughout the mountains. What people don't realize is that the clearer water is, the more likely it's biologically dead. Because when you have incredibly clear water, you're not going to have any of the plankton and the algae growth and, things like that. If you don't have plankton and algae growth in water, you do not have the basis of a food chain to be set up for it to cascade up. That's why in these extremely high clear mountain streams, you do not have extremely large fish predators on top of food chain. Usually they're found in larger turbid river systems. But I do want you to think about that. But remember, these forests are actually fairly nutrient poor. They're usually on a fairly decent slope with a lot of rains throughout the years, meaning a lot of that topsoil constantly gets washed away. And topsoil is the layer of soil that is going to hold most of the nutrients for plant growth and system. And so all of this topsoil is getting washed into the ocean. Well, there was an interesting article I read way back when, and there's been more studies going into it, but that article talked about how important migrating salmon was for the actual growth of the forest. Not, how important it is for bears and other things like that, which it is. It's incredibly important for bears, eagles, gulls, and things like that. Many animals depend on salmon runs to almost survive. But it's actually very important for the plants themselves, because what happened is these migrating salmon are bringing in all these nutrients from the ocean, because you have to think it spent 3, 4, 5 years out in the ocean eating krill and plankton, smaller fish, and gathering a lot of nutrients in its body. Then you have this really nice big fat salmon that is migrating upstream, and the animals will eat them, get their own nutrients, and then what do animals do after they eat? They go off into the woods and poop. Everybody poops. And so that's bringing nutrients actually back into the forest. But it's even beyond that. It's the article even looked at the like at the end of these salmon runs, they did nitrogen isotope tracing in the trees and found that even in the oldest trees in the forest, especially in the oldest, you go to the very beginning of their life cycle and looking at what the nitrogen components that cause this tree to survive, they are actually nitrogen isotopes that are predominantly found in saltwater organisms, meaning that those trees have been using and depending on nitrogen that was brought from saltwater environments into the old growth forests. And when is that going to happen? Well, that's actually going to be these salmon runs. And it goes into one of the other reasons why, you know, all the dams that have gone up and blocked fish passage throughout there, it's not necessarily just hurting the fish and hurting animals and causing other issues. It is actively reducing the amount of nutrients that the plants in the forest have access to and can grow, meaning that in the long run, the trees, new trees, are not going to have the nitrogen that their older trees were used to growing. They're not going to grow as big, as fast, or as thick, or as strong. So there's a lot of cascading effects that scientists are finding out. And, you know, I'm not going to say I'm a tree hugger and all that, but it's very interesting to think that a fish that, yes, we've known for hundreds and thousands of years, that this fish was important for the animals. In a lot of, because bears use the salmon run to really fatten up prior to migration, but it was, hibernation. Mrs. Ping corrected me there. But I want to say it's only been within the last 30 to 40 years that scientists are like, does it actually infect the plants? And it actually turns out that it is incredibly important for plants themselves in the old growth forest, for these salmon runs. Not to be doom and gloom, I just wanted to show you and have you think that sometimes impacts have much more farther reaching consequences than we could possibly imagine. But truly, it's a fascinating article. If I find it, I'll put it in the comments for everyone to read. If someone else finds it, please let me know. I'd like to read it again. But thank you guys so much again. I really appreciate it. Hope to see you again. If you'd like to support the channel, please click the link down below. It is by no means expected, but very much appreciated. Please leave that like, comment, and subscribe regardless. Take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and peace.